So, hey everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Talent Draup podcast. I'm Brian Heger, and I'm today's guest host. I'm also the founder of the TalentEdge Weekly newsletter. It's a newsletter that goes out to HR, talent, and business leaders who are interested in the future of work. And I'm really excited for today's discussion on a topic that is really critical to many of us and top of mind, and that's the area of strategic talent sourcing in the era of cost optimization. And joining me today are two fantastic guests. We have Vijay Swaminathan, co-founder and CEO of Draup, and Jessica Joseph, Director of Strategic Talent Sourcing at Aramark. Vijay and Jessica, great to have you both here joining.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so I'd love to, before we jump into the conversation, I'd love to give each of you just a brief moment to introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your role and what you focus on, and then we'll jump into the discussion. So Vijay, I'll start with you, and then once you're done, why don't you hand it over to Jessica so she can do her intro?
Sure. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Jessica. We call her JJ. Super privileged to be here. My name is Vijay Swami. I'm co-founder and CEO of Draup. Draup has been focused on talent intelligence and work redesign aspects for the last 7+ years. Really privileged to be here, Brian. I'm a big follower of your writings and postings and newsletters, and JJ, I'm a big fan of your leadership and how you use data in a practical way. So really excited about this next 20 or 30 minutes.
Great. Thanks, Vijay.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Jessica Joseph. As Vijay said, you can call me JJ, and I lead our talent sourcing organization for the U.S. at Aramark, and really excited to be here today. In my role at Aramark, I really focus on building a strategic sourcing function and transforming that the function that we have today to continue to be more future ready, one that looks at the enterprise and really cross line of business. We have 10 diverse lines of businesses at Aramark that we serve, and really understanding how we can understand the demand better, continue to improve on having ready now pipelines for the business, especially in a business that talent really makes or breaks whether we remain at our accounts and our relationships with our clients. So it's really important that we have the right talent on the ground. So excited that I get to do that for a company like Aramark that's been around for 90 years.
Thanks so much, Jessica. You do all the fun stuff, right? That's all
Yes.
the fun stuff. Well, thanks so much for that introduction, Jessica and Vijay. And why don't we just jump into a real practical discussion around this topic of strategic sourcing, especially in an era of cost optimization. And Vijay and JJ, you know this. We see a lot of different talent reports that come out with CEOs and the C-suite and business leaders. What are their top priorities? What are they focused on? And invariably, no matter what report you look at, as you start digging through that, it's no surprise that leaders are concerned that are we being intentional and proactive about having the talent that we need? And what's making that even more important is all the changes happening that we all know very well in the workplace. And then how do we keep cost optimization in mind, which is often a delicate balance? So given that context, where I want to start, and I think I'll start with you, JJ, given the role that you have, I want to start more with frontline type roles. And those frontline roles are typically they're high volume roles. They have a lot of local constraints, highly sensitive to timing and things like that, which makes it tough to anticipate what's going to happen and so on. So love to hear, given your role and what you and your team do, how do you do talent sourcing in this type of environment? Because there's a couple of challenges that you face. And then a second part of that question is how are you using talent intelligence to overcome those challenges and not only overcome them, but to use that as a strategic differentiator for you?
Yeah. Yeah, great question. And it definitely is a challenge. Our frontline hiring, like you said, it's very much focused on or dependent on the location and timing. And even when you're fully staffed, that could change tomorrow. And when it does change and you're reacting to that, it's really already too late. So it's really important that we shift, and something we're trying to continue to shift the mindset in at Aramark, and prior to this, I was with Walmart, and we're doing the same. And I think this is a challenge for all companies that have frontline hiring: is how do we move from a reactive state to a proactive state? How do we shift from just filling the requisition to anticipating those shortages and having that talent ready to go? And so we use talent intelligence to really help understand those market signals, and then we could spot those areas of stress early. And so when we do that, we can have our pipelines ready, and that helps us really reduce those fire drills, all of that wasted work that happens when you are reacting. And so it's really important that you understand those external signals, those market signals, so that even before your hiring numbers move. And like some examples of that would be, whether local labor supply is tightening, commuting patterns change. Obviously, there's larger signals, around the economy, but there's a lot of small local ones that are really important that you're outpacing. Your intelligence is outpacing that the supply changes and those market shifts.
And JJ, what's been the reaction from the team since you've been making that pivot?
So it's been interesting. I mean, obviously, it's a very large organization, and sometimes it takes time for those changes to come to fruition. Right, when you're planning for the future, it's not so much about the activity that people are used to seeing and feeling good about. Right, when you're in recruitment, recruitment's very much about filling roles, right? So this is a little different, but the reaction has been really positive, especially when folks start to see the change. When we have an account, we win a new account, or we have someone really fabulous move on to a promotion, and having external folks ready to go in addition to our internal folks. And then we have that slate ready, and they can make a decision really quickly, an informed decision because they have the slate ready. So once they start to see that, the feeling of activity changes, and the way they see TA as a whole has changed. And so it's been a really great reaction so far, and we're excited to just continue to scale it, so that we can make sure that every line of business in our company is feeling that.
That's great. I love that. I always love practical examples for the people that are actually doing the work, because you have to face the hiring managers, the business leaders who are really wanting to bring the talent in. So that's a great example. And the one thing I'll add before I hand it over to VJ to see if he has anything he wants to expand on from that perspective is, you're right. This doesn't happen overnight, but I'm big on, are we making progress in the right area? And what are those little mini indicators that suggest, wow, we're better off now than what we were 3 months ago? So it sounds like you're on that path. So JJ, thanks so much for sharing that. VJ, do you want to add anything to what Jessica shared? Because you deal with so many organizations and you see a lot. So anything you want to share with us?
Right. I was the power of frontline labor and the impact it has on organization is substantial, right? So recently, one of my flights got canceled, and as I was coming out, even though we know there is an app, there is a hotline, whatever that we can call, 90% of the people who walked out of that flight really sort of crowded around the agent who's sitting outside the aircraft, right? So, our first intuition when it comes to frontline work is to use humans at time of crisis. That's where frontline work, whether it is a nursing staff, whether it is truck driver, whether it is food service, right? So JJ knows that very well. In our, we actually trust humans more than machines, and it's going to take some time for us to get out of that. Like even in that airport example, when people saw, okay, one agent can't do anything, this many people, that's when they kind of say, okay, let me fire up my computer and see how I can do differently, right? Our first instinct in a healthcare setup or in a food service setup, we trust humans more. And thereby, it is going to be human intensive, labor intensive in the short run. Now, the challenge that um, leaders like JJ face is the frontline workforce is getting used to higher quality of digital tools on their personal lives. Like they are using most modern gadgets, phones, devices, etc. So they expect a certain amount of automation in their work to carry forward. Now, this is where the digital and AI investment in the front line actually becomes a necessity, because they are if you are serving a pharmacy, and if you do not have a proper kiosk to triage, like the frontline pharmacists are wondering, why don't I have that, right? Like, so why do I still have an outdated POS system, right? So that's how the corporate digital transformation pressure are coming in, because that becomes, what do they do if you don't roll out? They basically pick an organization that has more modern systems, like to when the labor is so thin in terms of availability, they go and pick, hey, I always like working in this company because they have modern systems. I don't have to go through the process that I go through here. So it becomes very, very important, right? So that dynamic we see playing out. The third one, what JJ said, is absolutely right. The frontline work is hyper local. It's even county specific, or if the county is big, even it's like minor constituency specific, because it depends on the economical strata of the labor force that you are tapping into. What is easy for a corporate job may not be, like, it may be okay for a FNA analyst to drive 40 miles to downtown, live in the suburb. Your accessibility radius is a bit high in cities, but frontline you don't have that, right? So you may be, people may be wanting to not travel more than certain distances, or they will depend on bus routes, right? So do I have public transport that can get me there? So there is just lots of signals that needs to be processed when it comes to frontline, is what I'm learning as well, Brian. So
I love that, VJ. It's so important what you said, because those signals, right? The more signals that we get, it's almost like filling in a piece of a puzzle. Like this piece of the signal might tell this part of the picture, and when you start bringing the whole piece together, even if it's a partial piece, we could take a lot of the guesswork out of it, or minimize the guesswork and make data driven types of decisions. And lastly, I love what you said about the front line. I always say, it's also important to know what our critical roles are surrounding the business strategy. And a lot of times we think critical roles are at the top of the organizational hierarchy, and we know that that's not the case. It's all dependent on
right.
your strategy. And you gave a great example of that, VJ, with the frontline worker example that you mentioned. So thank
Yeah.
you so much for sharing that, VJ. I want to shift into a second related topic. We talked about cost optimization, right? Because when we talked about those priorities that business leaders mention, yes, they want the talent. We want to prepare for the future of work, not only the future, but for today as well. But we also want to optimize our costs. We talk a lot about efficiency and sourcing, productivity and ROI. And Jessica, I'll go back to you on this particular question here. How do you go about balancing out the desire for cost optimization and efficiency and making sure that we're making the right and good decisions. Because sometimes if we move too fast, we might not make the best decision. And other times, if we are waiting for the perfect decision, we never take action. So nothing gets done, and then the business starts to suffer. So any practical examples of how you're approaching it and you and your team with your
Yeah,
organization?
yeah, absolutely. And speed, um, cost comes up a lot. When we have a vacant role open, I mean, we're in the business of hospitality. And when we have a vacant role open, that could really impact that business. And so it's really important that we're always looking at that. And something that we need to, focus on, in this world is really understanding how we can reduce spend, not just today but in the long term, and also that a bad hire is definitely more expensive than a vacant role for the right person. And so I think when you are insourcing, something that we can do is take a role that where we can put a cost to it, when there is the wrong hire and what that churn actually costs. And when we do that, I think we can come at it in a data informed way where we can go to the business and say, we understand this needs to be filled quickly. And here's our plan to do that. Let's get ahead of the churn where we can, and make sure that we plan, because that speed cost, it comes with the reduced cost comes with preparation, not necessarily those like shortcuts that we're constantly taking just to fill things quickly. And so I think those two really go hand in hand. And it's important that we really help the business understand that what we are doing and what we're preparing for will cost less in the long run. And so the goal ultimately is that we are always staffed, and keeping that sustainable. And so when we understand that true kind of like North Star, that helps us and helps the business understand that we need to build that sustainable plan so that we can get there, and continuing to, go after what's right in front of us so that we can have a body, in the seat or on the ground on the front line, can really hurt our business, because we are in the business of hospitality, especially. And so that's something that we always, have to remind.
That's a great practical
Great. Yeah.
example. And just before I go back to VJ to see what he wants to add, just a reaction to what you just said, JJ. And I love what you said. Business leaders and managers, they understand theoretically the importance of workforce planning and all the stuff that we're trying to do. But it's amazing how one of the reasons I think it doesn't advance much is because it gets attention. And then when things get okay, we deprioritize it. And I love what you said. I always love going to the business leaders or the business. And rather than starting with the technology or the process or the program, what is the business problem or opportunity that we're trying to solve for? And using real data to say, hey, here's why we think this is worth solving, and then come up with a solution, which could be a talent intelligence solution. And I also like adding at the end, if we don't move on this, that's a decision we can make. However, here's the cost of inaction. And are we okay with this? And what it means for the business. I think that kind of conversation gets some different outcomes. And it sounds like you're doing that by always starting with, hey, here's what we're trying to drive from a business perspective. And here's how we could do this through talent, intelligence, and strategic sourcing. So thanks so much for sharing that. Vijay, I know this is a topic that you get a lot of questions on with, especially with the clients and leaders that you work with. So what are your thoughts on that topic of cost optimization and trying to balance out the two that we
Right.
talked about?
I mean, absolutely. I think totally in alignment with what JJ said. I think um, for hospitality businesses or in general, food services type of industries, a wrong move could significantly derail the business. Even if you look at Starbucks, right? So when they switch to mobile order, while it is a technologically a fantastic innovation, you actually eroded the ground value of what Starbucks is all about, right? Like Starbucks is all about that interaction, that small talk, and picking up from the humans. Yes, it solved the queuing theory problem. As an industrial engineer, I'm fascinated by what the digital app did. You don't have to talk to anybody. You can just, your coffee will be ready and you go pick it up. But what happened in the after that in terms of customer trust, experience, all that, it's all for everyone to see, right? So um, while Brian, you made a great point. Those are decisions that we make when we are on high. The business is doing great. Hey, and I need to add more, move more. But rather, certain investments on digital, rather than remembering the recipes, we will auto feed you in an AI driven way at the point of ordering. Those technologies are great because it's enablement. So my theory has always been, when it comes to frontline, first you have to augment the human, then think about automating, right? And it's a big long cycle, because if you prematurely automate, even though that experience is awesome from a metric standpoint, it may have a negative impact on your business, right? So those are the aspects that people are beginning to understand, whether it is retail store. And the other thing I want to also understand is business for the last 2-3 decades, we've been sort of making the mistake that frontline is sort of disposable cheaper labor, other labor is not. Like, I think the industry has sort of been there is sort of an unstated opinion about frontline labor like that. That needs to change because, we've seen in places like Walmart and other, where truck drivers have made beautiful careers. Like, they have become multimillionaires. I've seen case studies like that. So it is actually an area where, in general, labor can make a lot of money and make careers. Like, there are so many levels in frontline. That's number one. I think that awareness doesn't exist, and as a result, and it is also an element that significantly contributes to the bottom line. So if we understand that, and if we start communicating to our frontline labor force that way, more people will come into frontline. Because the truck driver is a great example. For a long time, we thought truck driving will be automated and no need for truck drivers. And suddenly the pool that came into that shrunk. But we actually see that great truck drivers make ton of money. Great store managers make ton of money, and that part is not well understood for people who are making career decisions. As a result, if we can change that, more people will come in, because there is the desk jobs, there is a lot more AI threat there as well. So I think now is the time to reevaluate those frontline jobs, is sort of my thought there.
If I may say, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, JJ.
I completely agree with you, Vijay. And this is something, you just hit on something I'm really passionate about. Especially at Aramark, our frontline hourly folks have a very high promotion rate into our salaried roles, right? So when you think about the growth of folks, and when we think about recruit, from a business perspective, when we hire frontline, like, we're also hiring our potential future leaders of the company, and getting them to understand how important that is on the ground, that hospitality, and then bringing that, those values through the leadership is extremely important. And I agree with you that I think companies need to do a better job at really telling that story, so that folks are really seeing those frontline jobs as a career path. into greater opportunities. So and one more thing around like the technology and augmenting that, something that is really important that I instill in the team, in the sourcing team and greater TA team, is that we are branding as well. Every time we have a conversation with a candidate, that's branding, and building that brand. So like, yes, they can read all about Aramark online,
Okay.
but when they are our personal touch is really important. And so when they're having conversations with us and with the business, that part cannot be replaced. And we have heard from multiple candidates that meeting the team is what sells them
Got it.
on ultimately making the decision. So all of those things, including technology, to obviously to enable to like, get to a mass amount of people, but that personal touch, I think, is really
Okay.
what gets them to choose us.
No, that's super insightful. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, JJ, one final comment on that before we move to our last topic. And these conversations always go too fast, especially when they're really interesting and practical, because we can go all day on this here. But one reaction that you mentioned is I do think it's an untapped opportunity, sharing the story to frontline workers about the career paths and sharing those, because it's one thing to say it and to put it in materials, recruiting materials, but it's different when they can actually see people that have moved their careers and whatever those careers are, and hearing those firsthand. So I think the marketing of that and the sharing of that and the promotion of that is really, really important. And VJ, I like the example that you gave before about how technology can enable, but in some environments, that customer experience, especially with frontline workers, is so important. And the example that you gave, you know, the decision that we make to optimize could cut out critical points of the
Absolutely.
customer experience and that interaction that builds, loyalty over time and coming back to the store or the location and so on. So I think that's a great example. So again, I want to pivot to our last topic, and JJ, I'm going to start with you again on this one. I'm letting VJ off the hook on these. I got to next time we're going to go start with him here. But great conversation, and I want to talk about, to wrap this up, if we're focusing a lot of time, energy, organizational resources, and investments on all of this with strategic talent sourcing and talent intelligence, it's really important that we look at what are the metrics that we're using to demonstrate that we're making progress and that there is an ROI. And the environment may call for metrics that we used to use that may be less relevant today or not tell as much of the story, that we have to shift, and maybe new metrics that we now have to capture. So do you have any thoughts or tactics that you're using on how do you decide on what metrics you're using to articulate the narrative so that those business leaders that we talked about at the very beginning and sharing why we're doing this, we can come back to them and say, hey, here's how we're moving the needle on these things. And here's some of those signals and those early indicators. Any thoughts you can share on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a constant conversation and also educational, and one that continues to evolve. Even, as I continue to learn more about the business and what is really going to matter. So, first thing, time to fill, I feel like, is always a metric in talent acquisition that everyone talks about. But ultimately, it's really looking backwards, right? It's not really looking forward. It's about kind of like reporting on what we did. And so as we think about that, and as we look at metrics that we're continuing to build, as we build the foundation of a more pipelining focus, we're looking really about the pipeline health, right? Pipeline health, more than the volume. We're looking at how do we measure readiness versus activity. Understanding conversion quality, that is really important. How many of those candidates are converting to interviews and offers? That to me is more important than the volume of candidates. And then the next thing, and we're in some functions we're better at reporting than others, and I think that's probably across the board in enterprises. But the time to productivity. So are the candidates that we are putting forward and are getting hired, are they being productive faster? Like those are the things that I think the business really cares about, and they're not used to hearing about. So we are trying to, change the way we talk about these things so that our metrics are truly more guiding the priorities, so that we're more of a business partner than just reporting on, what we've done in our history.
Yeah, I love that shift from activity measures to true progress measures. And the one thing you mentioned about time to fill, I also think it's always important, no matter what metrics we decide are important, is clearly defining what we mean by that and understanding the different touch points. Because I
Mhm.
remember we all been through this time to fill. When does the clock really start? And what led to the time to fill the lengthy increase? Was it that we didn't really know what the job required or what we wanted in a candidate? Was it that we just didn't plan effectively and know that the role was coming? So it's not just a metric, it's about how do we make sure we clearly define it, but understand what are the things that influence it. I think that's really important. And it sounds like you're doing that within your organization. And VJ, I want to shift over to you because this has to be a question that you get from a lot of companies and business leaders. Anything you want to share with respect to metrics that we might focus less on when it comes to strategic talent sourcing and talent acquisition, and others we
Yeah,
might want to focus more on?
I think what we are seeing is a gradual but definite shift towards a role based hiring to a capability based hiring, because companies are, especially from a strategic sourcing standpoint, right? Like companies, the leadership is not very clear on what are all the roles I truly need for the future of work perspective. So they're going to have to say, hey, maybe I'm just completely making this up to relate to JJ's business. Maybe we need, let's say, some food samplers, right? Embedded in the cafeteria of Aramark. Let's say that's one of the futuristic need. There may be two or three roles associated with that, and where we are truly going in that direction as to how do I build that set of skills, capabilities. There may be 4 or 5 roles, and start holding the objectives towards yes, I have implemented that capability for you. And if even if it is more aggressive sensor based or feedback based data tracking, let's say as we finish eating, we are say, hey, the food was great, like a green, yellow. Let's say you are doing that data collection as part of your service delivery, then you need to bring that capability. So for every experience that we are seeking to implement, we are seeing a trend towards leaders themselves. We lived in a world where leaders knew these are all the roles, go higher. But I think there is a little bit of change coming there, and I'm beginning to see more capability-based hiring coming into strategic sourcing, especially, right? So I'm very excited about that period when it fully becomes mainstream. So
That's a great point. Love that shift from just looking at roles to more the broader capabilities because it enables us to do a lot more with the strategic talent sourcing and the planning and so on. And I apologize for keeping the two of you over. I know I only asked you for 20 minutes on this, but this has been a great discussion. And before we sign off, JJ and VJ, any final words for teams that are looking to do some of what we talked about as far as taking that initial next step? Part of what's behind my question, I always think that if we wait until we have the perfect plan and everything figured out, we never take the action. So I always like to say, what are one or two practical things that people could start thinking about if they're looking to start mobilizing and getting more effective at this strategic talent sourcing? Is there one, maybe two simple things that you would recommend that they do? And this goes out to either of you, and VJ or JJ, you can start first, but I think that's a good question that will give people some practical takeaways beyond what we shared already.
I'll let JJ weigh in because she's the leader here, doing it, practitioner.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and so I think that two things you could do. First is truly talk to the business and really understand their goals and think about how can you, from a sourcing perspective, help achieve those, and then put together a plan. The second piece to that, the layer on top, is prioritizing, getting the right people in the room, especially in these diverse businesses. And I've seen this at Saks, I've seen this at Walmart and at Aramark. Every business leader has obviously different priorities within their business that they care about. How do we bring them all together, find the commonalities? What is the 80% common, and then take those roles and start there. Start with one or two positions that are very critical to the business, and how can you improve the talent readiness of those roles? People are going to start to see the value, and then you can scale. I think sometimes we look at it as a whole big organization, and it's just too much to see through, and there's so much noise around it that it's hard to really understand the truth. So I think if you can really get down to that really quickly, you will have a really great start to a more business-led sourcing function, and as opposed to recruiter-led sourcing function, which I think most sourcing functions, from what I understand, are at today, and trying to evolve to.
That's such a great tactic, and I like that tip. I'm gonna have to take that one about finding that 80% where there's overlap, because if you focus on that 80%, it helps to stamp out some of that other noise that you
Yeah.
mentioned. And we can refine as we go and test and experiment.
Yes. Hmm.
VJ, do you want to take us home with any final exclamation point on any practical one or two tips that you'd recommend beyond that?
I think it's the same tip that JJ recommended. I just want to, double down on that. Mobility, 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 right? Like, so if we can educate the broader enterprise workforce that you can actually become a CEO by starting from frontline, that there are so many examples of that across industries. I think that will energize the frontline labor. And also, the digital tools have sort of removed certain friction points that existed, say, 5, 6 years ago. I think educating that, some communicating somehow that back to the workforce, you're not going to be on your feet forever, like just because you are. The term front line doesn't mean you have to be standing at the front of the line all the time, right? Like it just so this um, these categories of labor that worked helped in the industrial era is no longer helping us, because we're talking about even software engineers becoming frontline. What that means is you really have to go sit with the customers and find out what their true problems are. You can't just sit in some isolated remote area and then think that you know it all. Like, so every job is sort of frontline, becoming frontline some ways. And I think if we can communicate that, and the mobility point that JJ highlighted, I think that will lead to a very bright future from my perspective.
DJ, we're going to end on that note. Such a practical and enjoyable discussion. And I think you've both given the listeners and the viewers some practical ideas that they can work with on this. So I really enjoyed this. I'm looking forward to doing this again. I want to thank you so much for joining, and also thank those who joined us to watch this or listen to this on the Talent Draup podcast. So thanks again, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thank you so much, JJ. Appreciate your time.
Take care.
Thank you both so much. This was great.